Well, good morning. And I am incredibly honored and excited to be with Dr. Jan Wasowicz. And she is, among other things, the creator of the SPELLtalk. And I'm not going to do, I'm going to mainly leave talking about her background and the rest to her. But I just want to say how excited I am to have you on. And we're really looking forward to hearing all the things you're going to have to say. And I'll start with the first question, which is just tell us a little bit about your background in literacy.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I am thrilled to be here, and I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk with you, Sam, as well as to connect with all your many members out there. I'd like to say that I came into literacy and literacy instruction the way our students do. I came in through oral language. So I am a speech language pathologist. I'm a board certified specialist in child language. And in the early part of my career, I only worked, as most SLPs do, at least initially, I only worked on oral language. And so back in the, what was it? It wasn't in the 1800s. I'm not that old.
Oh my.
Oh my. It was in the 1980s. I was working with, at that time in my career, I was working with students who had, young students who had what's called phonological delay or expressive phonological disorder. Essentially, they're the kids who misarticulate sounds, right? The ones that are hard to understand because they're not pronouncing correctly. And typically, and this is a language disorder, and typically they have other language components as well that need to be addressed, syntax, vocabulary, etc. But anyhow, I was working with these young children, 5, 6, maybe 7 years old. And I was only working on the oral language, and their parents were starting to come to me and saying, well, what are you doing exactly with my children in your sessions? Because all of a sudden, their spelling and reading has improved dramatically at school. Mm-hmm. And I was not working on literacy, written language at that time in my career. I have since devoted my career to that, but I wasn't, but I knew the research. I knew what the research tells us about the interconnections of oral and written language. I knew that phonological awareness was a very critical component of that, and syntax and vocabulary and all of that. So anyhow, then the next question the parents asked was, well, is there some software program out there that we can get and do at home to add on to what you're already doing? Because this is great. You know, my kid's doing so great in school. So I didn't have children at the time. I still don't have children. But I went to the store and looked at the educational software that was on the shelves. And this was, again, early 80s, probably mid 80s, maybe late 80s. I'm sorry. It was the 1990s. It was the early 1990s. I'm getting it. Okay. So I went to the stores, and back then, all the educational software that existed fit on like 2 shelves that were no wider than my living room. And that was it. So, and when I looked at the software, I thought, this is not good quality. What's happening here? So I got it in my mind that my summer project would be to develop some type of educational software that would bring together oral language, early reading, and spelling instruction. And so what was going to be a summer project turned into a company with over 70 employees within 3 years. And that's the aerobics software programs. And many of your listeners are probably around long enough to remember them. I don't know if they're used in the schools now, but I launched my company and aerobics software in 1990s. Well, the company in 1996 and the software in 1997. Phonological awareness instruction, a little bit of print, not much at the time. And that was in 1997 and was doing well. And then in 1998 is when all this research, which I was aware of, it was what was driving my clinical work, the software, all the research came together in the National Reading Panel report. And Congress at that time mandated that every student in every school must receive phonological awareness instruction as part of standard curriculum. And so that really then set us apart because we were the only program, the only product on the market at that time because I'm an innovator. I'm always taking the research and putting it into practice ahead of everyone else. So anyhow, we were the only product on the market at the time, and so that took off and was extremely successful. I then left or sold that company actually, and rather than staying on with the new company, left to start another company, which really then focused on, okay, we've got the phonological awareness piece. We know that's important, but we've got to bring all the pieces together. So how are we going to do that with all of the components of reading and writing, both in oral language and then in written language? And so that's what I'm doing currently. So that's how I came into literacy and literacy instruction through oral language.
Oh my. I'm just, well, first of all, I must say, I was a reading specialist for 30 years in buildings. And the first person I'd always go to talk to with the cases that were hardest was the speech pathologist. And I think a lot of teachers weren't, at least at that time, weren't aware of what amazing people you are and what depth of knowledge you have. So I've drawn from that well many a time. So now I think you've kind of done the second question, that is the creation of SPELLtalk and what that's about. But before we move on to talking about Bruce's and stuff, just a quick plug. How do we join?
Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you that in just a minute. So the company I started is actually SPELLlinks, and that's where we have the products, Spellinks to Reading and Writing, and many other products that we sell. While I was doing that, I was, because there's a story, I have lots of stories, but there's a story behind SPELLtalk as well. SPELLtalk is a free professional discussion listserv. And at the time, and this goes back, it's what did I wrote it down? There's something like 20 years old. SPELLtalk has been around for 20 years. 20 years ago, I belonged to my own, as an SLP, my own professional group listserv, but it was all SLPs. And I kept thinking, well, this isn't good. We're just in our silo over here. We need to be talking with all the other teachers of literacy, right? It's not just the SLP. And I appreciate your comment and compliment before of SLPs in the profession. We do have a lot of knowledge, but it takes that team. It takes all of the educators coming together, right, to work to help students in literacy. So anyhow, I thought, well, there's got to be a place where we can bring, I like to say educators of all stripes, but bring all professionals concerned with literacy together to talk about all things literacy. And specifically, I wanted to focus on current research and evidence-based practices. So that's where and why I started SPELLtalk. And we have grown exponentially over 20 years. And there will be a link, I guess, in the show notes.
Oh, you betcha. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah. And but anyone can just, if you search for SPELLtalk, you'll find it. It's us, and there's a rock band called SPELLtalk. So we're not the rock band, but join the group. What I really like about SPELLtalk is that, well, first of all, when you join, you're going to receive a new research abstract Monday through Friday. And then we discuss either that research or just anything that's on anybody's mind. And what I like about it, again, is it's multidisciplinary. We have many of the major researchers in many different fields, a lot of university professors and academics, but we also have classroom teachers and specialists and school administrators. It's everybody coming together to, which is what we need to do for literacy instruction, right? I mean, that's the theme, I think, today, is we've all got to come together. So please do join, add your voice.
Okay. Been a member for a while and always get a lot of interesting information and ideas there. Let's talk about Bruce. Okay. When that Bruce got a hold of me first, and then kind of viewed me as a balanced literacy person, but I'm a person of many stripes. I'm really more a centrist, which means that I draw from everyone, which means I take flack from everyone. Okay, so but I just found his ideas fascinating, and he actually has hope that we could bring an end to the reading wars, not by having someone declare a victory, hey, my side won, but rather eliminating the sides and finding out what we all have in common. So that idea just created a spark for me. And then when he published that on SPELLtalk, and I just consider that a major turning point in things, that maybe finally we'll be talking to each other instead of yelling at each other, and perhaps finding some common ground and common practices. So that's my little lead in there. Tell us about Bruce. What do you think of his ideas? What do you think of the idea of using ideas from all sides to finally bring an end to this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bruce has been a SPELLtalk member for, I don't know, many years as well. And he reached out to me because as he was writing his blog, his article called Our Choice, he all of the points he was writing about resonated with the Language Literacy Network, which I created, and I know we're going to talk about today. And when he reached out to me and he shared his ideas with me, I saw, of course, that we were of kindred spirit, right? This is the message I believe we have to be focused on. And I do dislike very much the term reading wars because, like, let's look at the history of wars and civilization. It usually goes on forever, first of all. If there is an end, it's compromise, it's giving up, it's nobody's really happy. And that's not what this is about. This is about coming together, elevating the discussion and the perspective to realize it's not about who wins, who loses. It's about how do we bring all these very critical components of literacy together, and how do we do that to meet the needs of all children, all students. So yes, I dislike the term war. I want us to be coming together and having these dialogues, as you do here, and we will today. And I do think there's a tipping point right now with this, and this is part of it, helping to get the word out. The Language Literacy Network, Bruce's work. We're going to continue to have discussions on the Language Literacy Network and bring in some people to just talk about it and use that as our talking point.
Okay. Now, now's the time, and I know we're going to get some wonderful, and I hope I have this share screen done properly. You're going to talk next about the speech to print approach and how that's reflected in LLN. So I'll turn it back over to you, and if there's a glitch in sharing, I'll fix it.
Okay, not a problem. Give me a second to get that opened up as well. Okay, here we go. Let's see.
Oh, yay, it works.
Okay, I always like when technology works. So, okay, so there's a lot going on here, and I am going to talk about the speech to print advantage, but that's just one part of the Language Literacy Network. And I really want to kind of give the big picture, and I know this would be in the show notes as well. And we're making it freely available, and please, distribute it to your colleagues, everyone out there, distribute it to anyone who can use it as a talking point. I actually created the Language Literacy Network as a scholarly advancement over the reading rope. I know everyone's familiar with the reading rope, which was created 30 years ago. And so much of the research that is reflected in the reading rope has held up over the last 30 years. So yay. And so you'll see a lot of similarities when you look at this. But we have 30 more years of new research. And like any field of science, it evolves, and we learn new things. And when we know better, we do better. And so that was my impetus for creating the Language Literacy Network. And again, it's about bringing all the pieces, all the components. I'm not even going to say sides because it's components, right? Everything has to come together. So we won't have time today to go into all the detail here, and we do offer a separate webinar on just the Language Literacy Network and really taking a step-by-step tour through it. But what I think you'll notice on the left-hand side, which is the reading side, is there's a lot of similarity in terms of the components of the reading rope reflected here. Okay, so we of course have the higher order language skills of language comprehension. We have the word level skills of word recognition on the bottom, so top and bottom. We also have left and right going on here because when I got the idea about developing the language literacy network, it was in talking with colleagues and talking about reading, and everyone kept saying, well, wait, we need to talk about reading and writing, right? It's about all the components. And so someone said, well, we need a writing rope. And I said, no, because that's just like the other side. Here we go again, creating sides. It's about bringing it all together. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that I'm representing in this infographic the writing components of literacy. And on the top side, again, all those higher order language skills, syntax, verbal reasoning, pragmatics, background knowledge, vocabulary. And then on the bottom side, the bottom part, the written word, spelling the word, getting the word onto paper or wherever you're putting it on keyboarding. And so all these components, what I want to draw your attention to is these circles and these lines, these purple and these green lines. And what they're intended to represent are the neurons and groups of neurons and brain structure processes that integrate within the brain. So the purples are primarily the higher order skills, comprehension, expression of ideas. The green are primarily the word level and sublexical level, so encoding and decoding, spelling and reading of words, word level. But notice how the green are crossing over to the purple, and the purple are crossing over and integrating with the green, and everything is a very integrated network. And this is from the beginning of instruction that we want to be thinking about. How are we bringing all the components together, all the language components from the beginning of instruction, which is not reflected in the reading rope. The reading rope looks at it as a developmental progression over time, where initially it's separate. You work on comprehension and expression separate from decoding and encoding of words, and you gradually bring them together. But that's not what's represented here. The idea is all the components at all times are important. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of orchestrating that in a second. But I do want to point out the speech to print advantage. And Bruce, please, if I'm not clear there, if you're having a question, jump in and ask, because if you're having a question, I bet the listeners are having a question.
Actually, I'm having an aha moment because once again, we seem to be kindred spirits. I've for decades now said that we have to put this all together from the get-go in the instruction. And I think you just said that. So I'm just making a little note to myself.
Okay, so it's resonating with you. Right, and this is the, it's called the Language Literacy Network. It is about the language, the linguistic components. And yes, there are many other processes that have to play into reading and writing. We have attention, we have working memory, we have cognitive skills, we have engagement, we have motivation. All of those are very important, absolutely. But at the core, reading and writing is language. So that's what I really wanted to represent here. And those other pieces we could talk about, but thinking about them as maybe not wrapping around, because that implies separation again, maybe as being organically embedded within this. But this illustration itself is about the language components. So I just, again, want to highlight the speech to print advantage. I'm sure, I know you, Sam, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are hearing more about speech to print approaches to reading instruction. And speech to print is an area where we're, again, recent 20 years of research, we're learning that when students learn to decode, if they get good decoding instruction, they improve in their decoding skills. And great, that's good. But there's very little transfer. There is transfer, but there's very little transfer of decoding over to encoding, over to spelling and writing. Whereas when students receive encoding instruction and structured practice with writing words, they improve in their spelling, yay. But more exciting to me is that it generalizes much more to the decoding piece. So I'm all about, and I'm sure all of the practitioners out there are all about, how can I get the most out of my very precious instructional minutes? Where am I going to get the most bang for the buck, the best outcomes? And from my perspective and from the current research, there is an advantage of speech to print approach to spelling. Now, to go with our theme, it's not about one or the other. A lot of people, I think, have the misunderstanding that speech to print is all about spelling. Well, you're just teaching spelling. No, we're using spelling as a gateway to, and as an approach to reading instruction. And within any one lesson, within any session I spend with a student, I'm doing both spelling and reading. It's just, how am I leveraging the spelling to improve the reading? And how am I coordinating the reading with the spelling? So again, it's all this integration, all the components are coming together.
Okay. Lots of, we could stop right now and we'd have a great thing to talk about here. If we could take that down now, I want to move on to talking about Tim Brzezinski and the art and science of teaching reading, and most especially the things that are happening, very exciting things that are happening. I'll put a plug in for myself. We're going to be doing a webinar about what some people are doing with Tim's work in England, and I think I shared that with you. So just everything Tim Brzezinski here for a minute, in terms of the idea of art and science of reading and the adaptation of his ideas of actually teaching prosody as a way to improve comprehension, not the other way around. So just your reflections on that.
Yeah, well, there was a lot there, so I guess I'll take one piece at a time. So the art and science, I agree. We have to bring the science, we have to bring the research to what we're doing, and without that, we're not doing good instruction. But there is so much of a role and a place for the engagement, the creativity, the motivation, all of those components, which I know he endorses very much in his work. And to me, that's from the get-go. I mean, if I'm teaching how to write a letter, so it's a very basic component, or how to write a word. To me, first of all, if my student's not having fun, I'm not having fun. So I've got to bring that creativity in, and that fun component, and that motivation from the very beginning. And there's so many ways. I mean, really, that piece is only limited by your own creativity, but you can't just go to that creative component, the art, without having the science. So it is both the science and the art of reading and writing. May I just say, it's the reading and writing. So yes, we do have to understand the science, but there's so much more we have to understand so that we can, as teachers, I like to think of myself. I think of myself sometimes, or I feel as if I am, if you can picture now that language literacy network, I feel like I'm in the center, and I'm the linguistic orchestra conductor. I'm the conductor, and I've got to bring all these pieces together, right? And I've got to know my different instruments, my students, and I've got to know when to call on that one and where they are and how I'm going to support them, but how I'm also going to connect what they need and where they're at with all the other components. So and that to me is you have to know the science, but that becomes very artful and very intuitive as well. And that just comes with practice and time and experience. So I don't know there if you want to dig into that art piece more, but I can talk maybe about Penny Slater and Kathy Rowe's work that you had, I think, on a recent podcast here.
Yes. Basically, what they've discovered there in England, first of all, they've discovered that there are some children there that are rather clearly they way overdue the decoding parts of things, and some people say don't use the term word callers. I'm not sure how else to say it, but that there are children like that because someone failed to, in my opinion, take on both at the start. They've kind of created children that get overly focused on the decoding and not focused at all on the comprehension. And what they found was that by teaching prosody, and by teaching kids to teaching all the different components of that in itself was created better comprehension. And in the webinar that'll be coming up, they'll be talking about some of the practical things they do. And somehow or another, I have a feeling that some of that's going to just jive exactly with some of the things you do. So I think that this idea that phonics first, comprehension later, kind of goes out the window. And so I'm looking for a reaction both to this is preliminary stuff in England. There's still more research to be done on it, but their results were just so amazing. We're talking about large growth in a very short time just by teaching prosody to start with. And that kind of turns things on its head, because normally we think, oh, we develop prosody and then the comprehension comes. Well, no, the teaching the prosody, teaching the prosody actually results in the comprehension. So just your reactions to what I just said.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, if you look again at the Language Literacy Network, one of the pieces I added, remember, this is a scholarly advancement over the reading rope. One piece I added that isn't on the reading rope is prosody, because we do recognize the role of prosody and what's called prosodic competence. Prosodic competence is a term used more to describe a student's awareness of prosody. Just like phonological awareness is an awareness of phonology, or phonemic awareness and awareness of phonemes. Prosodic competence is an awareness of prosody. And this can start at the very early, again, word level. If I'm working with students who are just beginning to read and write, we have what's called lexical prosody or lexical stress. So the difference between record and record is prosody. It's lexical stress. I work primarily with students who struggle. It could take my students months to identify, to become aware of prosody at the word level. So this is an awareness skill. Once they have it, because it's not that they don't perceive prosody. It's not that they don't hear it. They just aren't aware of it. They don't know what to tune into. And so we can begin working on that at a word level and help our students develop those very early skills. And again, anything we're doing, even when we're working at the word level, hopefully, ideally, we're integrating reading, if not reading by the student, reading to the student, or shared reading kinds of experiences. So I am familiar with Kathy Slater, Penny Slater and Kathy Rowe. Yes. And so first of all, I know I haven't read the actual research, but I, on face value, will accept what they reported, in that when they worked with these students and they describe a variety of activities they did, that they got dramatic results. And but my question, being the scientist and the analytical thinker, is, okay, but why? Why did they get it? So doing this obviously has some dramatic effect. And is it simply by students becoming more aware of prosody? Very well could be. There's a set of students who aren't aware and they need that extra help. My guess, like everything else, is there's different students who benefited from different parts of that activity in different ways, all improving both prosody and comprehension. So another possibility, or some students might have also benefited from the repeated readings, where they were getting those multiple exposures to the words and the syntactic units of phrases and sentences that help them build their syntax skills, their linguistic comprehension at a sentence level, which would also then facilitate prosody. So I think it's going both ways. I don't think, I think the jury is still out on the causal relationship. Something very powerful is happening, but which direction is it going? What is causing what? And it's probably not as black and white as this is causing that. But again, we have these subsets of students, and each of those subsets is probably benefiting from different components in different ways. So I'm excited about the outcomes, but I also want to pull it apart more and understand it better.
Spoken like a true scientist. Okay, so it's never, we never know all the answers. So we've got to eternally be, okay, now we're this far along. Now what can we learn? And I love that attitude. To me, that's the attitude of a true scientist. Okay, we've talked a lot, and we're getting close to wrap up time. But before I do that, I always like to give the people I interview a chance to say, hey, Sam, why didn't you let me talk about this? Okay, so is there anything else that we need to talk about before we wrap things up here? Any big things?
Yeah, I want to leave. I think I want to leave your your listeners with some thoughts to think about. But before I do, I just want to reemphasize the importance of speech to print, but within the model of bringing all the components together, reading and writing. And please, keep that in mind. But my questions are all, we want to be engaged and dynamic, right, as well as teachers, or we should be. So I'm very not a proponent of scripts. I'm a proponent of learn the research, learn the evidence-based methods, and then be flexible and creative in putting that into practice. But always be asking questions. Who is the student you're working with, or the group of students? Because each student is coming with their own background, right? We have non-mainstream speakers, dialect speakers. We have students coming from low print, low verbal homes. We have students who have learning disabilities, students who have language learning disabilities, DLD, developmental language disability. So know who your student is, and then always be asking. I'm going to actually give you some questions to always be asking, but who is your student? What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish at that point? I get so many questions from teachers, practitioners who say, well, should I do this? And my response always starts with, well, it depends. It depends on what is your goal. What at this moment are you working to accomplish? Because that should be driving what you're doing. And then where is your student? We've always got to meet our student, our group of students, where they are. So you've got to know what your goal is, who your student is, and then how can we work on whatever that needs to be for that student. And think of them again. If you think about the language literacy network and all those components as maybe all the musical instruments in the orchestra, you've got a musical instrument here that maybe needs some tune-up and maybe some practice, some scale practice a little bit. But how are you going to integrate that with all the components of literacy, reading, writing, comprehension, expression, decoding, encoding? How can you bring that all together as quickly as possible? Again, maybe you need to take a few minutes of a session. I'm not talking about weeks. I'm talking about a little bit of time to tune that instrument, but then bring it all together. So how can you do that? And why? Always ask why you're doing what you're doing. I believe in knowing the research, being flexible, knowing your students, and thinking, always coming back to that model. Why are you doing what you're doing, and how is this helping that reading, writing network of the brain develop? That is something I haven't said yet, Sam, I do want to mention, is that the reading and writing network in the brain, which we now better understand because in the last 20 to 30 years, we've had a lot of brain imaging technology available to study reading. And what we do know is that unlike oral language, where we're biologically wired from the get-go to speak and to listen and understand, the reading and writing neural network in the brain, which language literacy network is intended to represent very schematically, but that reading writing network in the brain only develops through instruction. And the better the instruction, the more integrated, the more functionally connected our instruction is, the more functionally connected that neural network becomes for reading and writing. So we want to bring everything together. We want to bring all of us together. And it goes back to that theme, Sam. It's about, let's elevate the discussion to working on all the parts and all the pieces. They're all important.
Wow. I see a soundbite there, that very last statement. Wow. Okay. Well, that all said, now we come to an almost silly part of the interview. Okay. And that is a tradition on my interviews that we always end them with a Zoom wave goodbye, a nice big smile, and a Zoom wave goodbye to our listeners. So thank you so much again, and lots to unpack from today.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Sam.